Chapter 1. Life along the Nile, the world of ordinary Egyptians. The story of ancient Egypt is often told through its pharaohs, temples, and pyramids, but the true heart of Egyptian civilization beat in the lives of ordinary people. Farmers, fishermen, potters, bakers, builders, and weavers made up the vast majority of the population. Their days were shaped not by royal decrees or monumental ambitions, but by the rhythm of the Nile, the demands of survival, and the traditions passed from one generation to the next. For most Egyptians, life unfolded along the fertile banks of the Nile River. This narrow strip of green land, surrounded by vast deserts, was both a gift and a necessity. Each year, the Nile flooded its banks during the season known as Akhe, depositing rich black silt across the fields. This natural cycle determined everything: when crops were planted, when families worked, and even when they rested. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been nothing more than an inhospitable wasteland. With it, ordinary people could build stable communities and sustain large families. Villages were typically small and closely knit. Mud brick houses clustered together, often surrounded by fields of wheat and barley. Life was communal by necessity. Neighbors shared tools, helped with harvests, and looked after one another's children. The idea of privacy as understood today barely existed. Daily life was lived largely outdoors in courtyards, streets, and fields, under the ever-present sun. The majority of Egyptians were farmers. Men, women, and children all participated in agricultural labor. At dawn, families rose early to avoid the worst heat of the day. Men worked the fields using simple wooden plows pulled by oxen, while women planted seeds or gathered crops. Children scared birds away from ripening grain or helped carry water from the river. Farming was physically demanding, but it was also predictable, governed by the steady rhythm of the seasons rather than constant uncertainty. Despite the hard labor, most Egyptians did not live in constant misery. Archaeological evidence suggests that even common people enjoyed moments of rest, celebration, and joy. Religious festivals were frequent and involved the entire community. Music, dance, and beer were common elements of these gatherings. Religion was not confined to temples or priests, it was woven into everyday life. Ordinary people prayed to household gods, wore amulets for protection, and believed deeply in the balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order that governed the universe. Food was central to daily existence. Bread and beer formed the foundation of the Egyptian diet, consumed by nearly everyone regardless of social status. Bread was made from emmer wheat and baked in clay ovens, while beer was thick, nutritious, and often safer to drink than water. Meals were simple but sustaining. Onions, garlic, lentils, dates, and figs were common, and fish from the Nile provided an important source of protein. Meat was rare for the poor and usually reserved for special occasions or religious festivals. The family unit was the cornerstone of society. Marriages were typically arranged, but evidence suggests that women enjoyed more rights than in many other ancient cultures. They could own property, inherit wealth, and initiate divorce. Within the household, women managed food preparation, childcare, and weaving, while also contributing to agricultural work when needed. Children were valued and expected to help from a young age, learning skills by observing their parents. Education for ordinary Egyptians was practical rather than formal. Most children did not attend schools like those reserved for scribes or elites. Instead, knowledge was passed down orally and through hands-on experience. A potter's son learned to shape clay, a farmer's daughter learned when to plant and harvest, and a fisherman's child learned the currents and moods of the river. Skills ensured survival and continuity. Health and medicine were basic but surprisingly advanced for the time. Healers relied on herbal remedies, practical treatments, and magical spells, often combined. Common ailments included infections, injuries from labor, and dental problems caused by gritty bread. Life expectancy was low by modern standards, but many people lived into their 40s, especially if they survived childhood. As the sun set each day, villages quieted. Families gathered to eat, talk, and rest. Oil lamps flickered inside mud brick homes, casting shadows on walls decorated with simple tools and woven mats. Tomorrow would bring more work but also continuity, a life deeply rooted in land, tradition, and community. This was the world of ordinary Egyptians, hardworking, resilient, deeply spiritual, and profoundly connected to the Nile. Their lives may not have been immortalized in stone monuments, but without them, the grandeur of ancient Egypt would never have existed. Chapter 2: What They Ate, Food, Bread, and the Taste of Daily Life. For ordinary Egyptians, food was not merely sustenance. It was the foundation of survival, labor, and social life. Every day began and ended with the question of nourishment: shaped by the land, the river, and the season. While royal banquets and temple offerings dominate popular imagination, the true Egyptian diet was humble, repetitive, and deeply practical, yet surprisingly balanced for its time. At the center of nearly every meal were bread and beer. These two staples defined Egyptian nutrition across all social classes, though the quality varied greatly between rich and poor. For common people, bread was made primarily from emmer wheat, a hardy grain well suited to the Nile's fertile soil. The process of making bread was labor-intensive and usually fell to women. Grain was first ground using stone querns, a task that took hours and often damaged teeth due to grit from the stones. The resulting flour was coarse, dark, and full of fiber. Dough was mixed with water, sometimes flavored with dates or honey if available, and baked in clay ovens or directly on heated stones. Egyptian bread came in many shapes, flat, round, conical, and textures from dense and chewy to lightly fermented. Though simple, it provided essential calories for people who worked long hours in the fields or workshops. Beer was equally important, consumed daily by adults and children alike. Unlike modern beer, Egyptian beer was thick, cloudy, and closer to a liquid porridge. It was made by partially baking bread, crumbling it into water, and allowing it to ferment naturally. Rich in nutrients, beer supplied calories, vitamins, and safer hydration than river water alone. Workers were often paid in beer rations, and even children drank weaker versions diluted with water. Beyond bread and beer, the diet of ordinary Egyptians depended heavily on vegetables and legumes. Onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, lentils, chickpeas, and beans were widely cultivated and eaten fresh or dried. These foods were not luxuries, they were essential sources of vitamins and protein. Onions and garlic, in particular, were believed to strengthen the body and were highly valued by laborers. The Nile itself provided another crucial source of nourishment: fish. Tilapia, catfish, and mullet were commonly caught using nets, traps, or simple hooks. Fish could be eaten fresh, dried in the sun, or salted for preservation. For many families, fish was the primary source of animal protein, far more accessible than meat. Fishing was often a communal activity, involving entire families along the riverbanks. Meat, however, was rare in the daily lives of the poor. Cattle were valuable for labor and milk, not slaughter. Goats and sheep were occasionally eaten, but usually only during festivals, religious ceremonies, or special family events. Poultry such as ducks and geese were more common, but still not part of everyday meals. For most Egyptians, meat was a taste associated with celebration rather than routine. Fruits added sweetness and variety to the diet. Dates were among the most important, eaten fresh or dried and often used as natural sweeteners. Figs, grapes, pomegranates, and melons were also enjoyed when in season. Honey, though known, was expensive and generally reserved for the wealthy or for religious offerings. Ordinary people relied on fruit to satisfy cravings for sweetness. Cooking was simple and practical. Most meals were prepared in a small open courtyard or outdoor area to avoid heat and smoke inside the house. Clay pots were used to boil stews made from vegetables and grains, flavored with herbs such as coriander and cumin. Salt was used sparingly and spices were limited but effective. Meals were typically shared from common bowls, reinforcing the communal nature of family life. Food was also deeply connected to religion and belief. Egyptians believed that the gods provided abundance through the Nile, and offerings of bread, beer, and vegetables were made at household shrines. Even ordinary families participated in religious festivals where food played a central role. During these celebrations, temple offerings were sometimes redistributed, allowing common people rare access to meat and rich foods. Hunger, however, was a constant threat. When the Nile flood was weak or delayed, crops failed and food shortages followed. In such times, families relied on stored grain, dried fish, and community support. Government granaries, managed by scribes and officials, helped prevent widespread famine, though the poorest still suffered the most during difficult years. Children learned early about food and survival. Girls helped their mothers grind grain and bake bread, while boys assisted in fishing or gathering produce. Food preparation was a skill passed down through generations, embedded in daily routine rather than formal instruction. Despite the simplicity of their meals, ordinary Egyptians were not ignorant of pleasure. They enjoyed eating together, sharing beer, and celebrating abundance when it came. Meals were moments of rest in otherwise demanding days, offering comfort, routine, and connection. Through bread baked by hand, beer brewed at home, and fish pulled from the Nile, food sustained not only the bodies of common Egyptians, but also their culture. It was the quiet constant of daily life, unrecorded in royal inscriptions, yet essential to the endurance of one of history's greatest civilizations. Chapter 3: Home and Shelter, Houses, Villages and Family Space. For ordinary Egyptians, a house was not a symbol of wealth or status, but a place of necessity, protection and family life. Unlike the monumental stone structures built for gods and kings, the homes of common people were humble, practical and temporary. Made primarily of mud brick, these houses were shaped by climate, resources and the rhythms of daily labor. Though simple, they were carefully designed to meet the needs of families living in a hot and demanding environment. Most villages were built close to the Nile but slightly elevated to avoid seasonal flooding. Streets were narrow and irregular, formed organically rather than planned. Houses stood close together, often sharing walls to conserve materials and reduce exposure to heat. From the outside, a typical home appeared plain and almost windowless, offering little indication of the life within. Mud brick was the primary building material. Made from Nile mud mixed with straw and dried in the sun, bricks were inexpensive and easy to produce. While durable in dry conditions, they eroded quickly when exposed to water, requiring constant repair. As a result, houses were rarely permanent structures. Walls were patched regularly, roofs rebuilt, and entire homes reconstructed over generations. This impermanence shaped how ordinary Egyptians viewed domestic space, not as something eternal but as something functional. A typical house consisted of one or two main rooms and a small courtyard. Wealthier commoners, such as skilled artisans or village officials, might have several rooms, but most families lived in compact spaces. The courtyard served as the center of domestic life. Here, food was prepared, tools were stored, animals were kept and children played. Much of daily life happened outdoors, sheltered only by walls and simple reed coverings. Inside the house, furnishings were minimal. Floors were packed earth, sometimes covered with mats woven from reeds or palm fibers. Low wooden stools, small tables and storage jars lined the walls. Beds were simple wooden frames with woven cord supports, often raised off the ground to avoid insects. In poorer households, family members slept on mats, sharing space closely. Light entered through doorways and small openings near the roof, minimizing heat while allowing airflow. At night, oil lamps made from clay provided dim illumination. These lamps burned animal fat or plant oil and filled the room with smoke and shadows. Despite these conditions, homes offered refuge from the sun and protection from the desert winds. Family life was tightly interwoven with domestic space. Egyptian families were typically nuclear, consisting of parents and children, though extended relatives often lived nearby. Marriage was common and expected, and households were organized around cooperation and shared labor. Men, women, and children all contributed to maintaining the home. Women played a central role in household management. They were responsible for food preparation, weaving clothing, raising children, and maintaining cleanliness. Storage jars filled with grain, beer, and dried foods were carefully managed to last through lean seasons. A well-organized household meant survival during times of scarcity. Children grew up within this shared space, learning through observation rather than instruction. A child's world was small, centered on the house, the village, and the fields beyond, but it was rich with routine and responsibility. From a young age, children helped fetch water, care for siblings, and assist in household tasks. Toys were simple, often handmade from clay or wood, but play was woven naturally into daily life. Homes were also places of belief and spirituality. Many households maintained small domestic shrines, often simple niches in the wall holding figurines of protective gods such as Bes or Tarid. Families left offerings of food or drink and recited prayers for health, fertility, and protection. These private acts of devotion were as important as temple rituals, grounding religion in everyday experience. Cleanliness was valued, though water had to be carried by hand from the Nile or wells. People bathed regularly, often outdoors, and used natron, a natural mineral mixture, as soap. Personal grooming, including shaving and oiling the skin, was common even among the poor, reflecting cultural ideals of order and purity. Villages themselves functioned as extended households. Neighbors shared ovens, tools, and labor. Walls between homes were thin both physically and socially. Sounds, smells, and conversations traveled freely. Privacy, as understood in modern terms, was rare, but mutual dependence created strong communal bonds. Life inside these homes was shaped by heat and daylight. Days began early, and activities slowed during the hottest hours. Evenings were a time of gathering, storytelling, eating, and rest. As darkness fell, families retreated indoors, the flicker of lamps marking the end of another labor-filled day. Though modest and fragile, the homes of ordinary Egyptians were spaces of resilience. Within their mud brick walls, families endured hardship, celebrated festivals, raised children, and passed down traditions. These houses may have vanished under centuries of wind and sand, but they once sheltered the people who sustained Egyptian civilization through countless generations. Chapter 4: Work and Routine. Labor, Skills, and the Rhythm of the Day. For ordinary Egyptians, work was not a separate part of life. It was life. Survival depended on daily labor, and every hour of daylight was shaped by the need to produce food, tools, clothing, or services. From farmers and fishermen to potters and builders, the vast majority of the population lived by the strength of their hands and the skills learned from their parents. The rhythm of work followed the sun, the seasons, and above all, the Nile. The agricultural calendar governed everything. During the flood season, when fields lay submerged, farming paused. This period did not mean idleness. Instead, men were often called to work on state projects such as maintaining canals, repairing dikes, or building temples and tombs. These labor duties were a form of taxation, paid not in money but in time and effort. Ordinary Egyptians did not view this as slavery. It was a communal obligation tied to survival and divine order. Once the waters receded and the fertile soil was revealed, the planting season, parate, began. Families worked together to sow wheat, barley, and vegetables. Seeds were scattered by hand, then pressed into the earth by herds of sheep or goats. Tools were simple: wooden plows, stone or copper sickles, and baskets woven from reeds. The labor was exhausting but efficient, refined over centuries. The harvest season, Shimu, was the most intense. Fields filled with workers cutting grain, binding sheaves, and transporting harvests to storage. Scribes measured yields carefully, ensuring that taxes were collected for the state granaries. Though this oversight could be stressful, it also provided security. In years of poor harvests, these granaries prevented mass starvation, reinforcing the idea that labor and order were inseparable. Not all Egyptians were farmers. Villages supported a wide range of specialized trades. Potters shaped clay vessels used for cooking, storage, and ritual. Weavers, often women, produced linen from flax, spinning thread and working looms in courtyards or shaded areas. Carpenters crafted tools, furniture, and boats, while metalworkers forged copper implements essential for agriculture and construction. Craftsmanship was learned through apprenticeship rather than formal schooling. A child born to a potter became familiar with clay almost from infancy. Skills were passed down through generations, creating family professions that defined identity and status within the community. While these artisans were not wealthy, they held respect and relative stability compared to landless laborers. Workdays began at dawn. The early hours were the most productive before the sun became oppressive. Midday brought rest, shade, and simple meals, followed by continued labor until sunset. There was little distinction between weekdays and weekends, though religious festivals provided breaks from routine. These festivals were eagerly anticipated, offering music, food, and communal joy. Women worked constantly, though much of their labor went unrecorded. In addition to household duties, women participated in agriculture, weaving, brewing beer, and selling goods at local markets. Their work was essential to economic survival. While men performed most heavy labor, women's contributions were no less vital, ensuring the functioning of both family and village. Children were part of the workforce from a young age. There was no concept of childhood as a protected stage of life. Instead, children learned responsibility early, assisting in fields, workshops, and homes. Play existed, but it was woven into work, not separate from it. By adolescence, most children were fully integrated into adult roles. Markets were centers of exchange rather than profit. Barter dominated, with goods traded for grain, beer, or labor. A pot might be exchanged for vegetables or a day's work for food. Coinage did not exist in daily transactions. Value was measured in necessity rather than currency. Despite the hard labor, Egyptians took pride in their work. Tomb inscriptions and artwork, created by elites but depicting common life, show farmers plowing, fishermen casting nets, and craftsmen at their tasks. These scenes suggest that work was viewed not merely as obligation, but as contribution to Ma'at, the cosmic balance. Fatigue, injury, and illness were constant risks. Agricultural work caused strained backs, joint damage, and infections. Craftsmen suffered from repetitive strain and exposure to heat and fumes. Yet there was little alternative. Work was survival, dignity, and duty combined. As the sun set, tools were stored, animals secured, and families returned home. The body rested, but the cycle never truly ended. Tomorrow would bring the same tasks, the same rhythms, the same dependence on the land and the river. Through their labor, ordinary Egyptians sustained temples, fed cities, and supported the grandeur of kings. Though their names are mostly lost to history, their work was the foundation upon which ancient Egypt stood. Chapter 5. The Body and Daily Care, Clothing, Hygiene and Health. For ordinary Egyptians, the body was both a tool for survival and a reflection of order and balance. Daily life demanded physical endurance, and caring for the body was not a matter of vanity but of necessity. Clothing, hygiene and health practices were shaped by climate, available resources, and deeply held cultural beliefs about purity, protection and harmony with the natural world. Clothing in ancient Egypt was simple, functional, and well suited to the intense heat. Linen, made from flax grown along the Nile, was the primary fabric worn by all social classes. For common people, garments were coarse and unbleached, unlike the fine, translucent linen worn by elites. Men typically wore short kilts tied at the waist, while women wore straight ankle-length dresses held up by shoulder straps. Children often wore no clothing at all until adolescence, a practical response to the climate and labor demands. Garments were few in number. Most people owned only one or two sets of clothing, worn daily and washed frequently. Linen was light and breathable but fragile, requiring constant care. Tears were mended repeatedly, and worn garments were repurposed as rags, bandages, or padding. Clothing was a valuable possession, maintained with care rather than replaced. Despite limited resources, personal cleanliness was highly valued. Egyptians bathed regularly, often daily, especially after work. Bathing usually took place outdoors, using water carried from the Nile or drawn from wells. Both men and women washed with natron, a naturally occurring mineral mixture that functioned as soap and disinfectant. Oils and fats were applied to the skin after bathing to prevent dryness and protect against sun and insects. Hair care was equally important. Many men and women shaved their heads or kept their hair closely cropped to reduce heat and prevent lice. Wigs, though associated with elites, were also worn by some common people on special occasions. For most, however, practical grooming took precedence over fashion. Children's heads were often shaved, leaving a single lock of hair, a style both symbolic and hygienic. Cosmetics were not exclusive to the wealthy. Both men and women used eye makeup made from ground minerals such as galena and malachite. Beyond aesthetic appeal, these substances protected the eyes from glare, infection, and insects. This practice reflected the Egyptian belief that beauty, health, and protection were interconnected. Health was a constant concern in a physically demanding world. Injuries from agricultural work, construction, and craftsmanship were common. Cuts, fractures, and infections posed serious risks, especially without modern medical knowledge. Yet Egyptian medicine, even among common people, was surprisingly advanced for its time. Healers combined practical treatments with religious and magical elements. Herbal remedies were widely used: honey for wounds, garlic for strength, willow bark for pain, and various plants for digestive or respiratory issues. Bandaging techniques were effective, and some surgical procedures, such as setting broken bones, were well understood. Magic played a central role in healing. Illness was often believed to be caused by malevolent spirits or imbalances in Ma'at. Amulets depicting protective deities like Bes or Ta'aret were worn by adults and children alike. Spoken spells and prayers accompanied treatments, offering psychological comfort alongside physical care. Dental problems were widespread due to gritty bread and limited oral hygiene. Tooth decay, abscesses, and worn enamel were common, causing chronic pain. While some dental treatments existed, most people endured these conditions throughout their lives. Eye infections, parasites, and joint disorders were also frequent, especially among the poor. Life expectancy was relatively low by modern standards, largely due to infant mortality. However, those who survived childhood often lived into their 40s or 50s. Aging brought respect within the family, as elders were seen as carriers of knowledge and tradition. Physical decline was accepted as part of the natural order rather than resisted. Women faced additional health risks related to childbirth. Pregnancy and labor were dangerous, and maternal mortality was high. Midwives assisted births, using herbal remedies and protective charms. Despite the risks, fertility was celebrated, and children were seen as blessings essential to family survival. Rest was as important as labor. After long days of work, Egyptians valued sleep and recovery. Beds were simple but functional, often elevated to avoid insects. Sleep took place in shared spaces, reinforcing family bonds. Care of the body extended beyond life itself. Egyptians believed deeply in the afterlife, and even common people hoped for continued existence beyond death. While they could not afford elaborate mummification, basic burial practices were observed. Bodies were wrapped in linen, and simple grave goods were included, reflecting the belief that the body, cared for in life, remained significant in death. Through daily washing, careful grooming, and healing practices rooted in tradition, ordinary Egyptians maintained their bodies in a harsh environment. These routines, repeated day after day, allowed them to endure physical hardship while upholding cultural ideals of balance, purity, and resilience. Chapter 6: Belief, Community, and the Meaning of Life. For ordinary Egyptians, life was more than labor, hunger, and survival. Beneath the routines of work and family existed a rich inner world shaped by belief, tradition, and community. Religion was not a distant institution controlled only by priests and kings. It was a living presence woven into every aspect of daily existence. Through faith, festivals, and shared customs, common people found meaning in a demanding world. The foundation of Egyptian belief was Ma'at, the principle of balance, order, and justice that governed the universe. Ordinary people may not have articulated Ma'at in philosophical terms, but they lived it daily, through honesty, cooperation, respect for family, and fulfillment of duty. A good life was not defined by wealth, but by harmony with others and with the gods. Most Egyptians interacted with religion at the household level. While grand temples dominated the landscape, daily worship often occurred at home. Small shrines, simple figurines, or painted symbols honored protective deities. Gods such as Bes, guardian of households and children, and Ta'aret, protector of fertility and childbirth, were especially important to common families. These deities were approachable, intimate, and deeply personal. Prayer was informal and constant. People spoke to the gods while working, traveling, or resting. Requests for health, protection, and successful harvests were common. When misfortune struck, it was often interpreted as a sign of imbalance, prompting offerings or rituals to restore harmony. Faith provided reassurance in a world filled with uncertainty. Festivals were the emotional highlights of the year. Religious celebrations broke the monotony of labor and united entire communities. During festivals, statues of gods were carried through villages, music filled the streets, and food and beer flowed freely. For ordinary Egyptians, these occasions offered rare access to abundance and joy. Meat, normally scarce, was distributed from temple offerings, reinforcing the bond between gods and people. Music and dance were integral to social life. Simple instruments, drums, flutes, clappers, accompanied celebrations and family gatherings. Singing was common and rhythm guided work as well as play. These shared experiences strengthened communal ties and provided emotional release. Social relationships were based on mutual dependence. Villages functioned as extended families, where cooperation ensured survival. Neighbors helped with harvests, construction, and childcare. Conflict existed, but social pressure encouraged resolution rather than division. Reputation mattered deeply, as trust was essential in a barter-based economy. Marriage and family life formed the core of emotional identity. Husbands and wives worked as partners, sharing responsibility for children and household survival. Love, companionship, and affection are evident in letters, songs, and tomb inscriptions, suggesting that emotional bonds were valued alongside duty. Divorce, while possible, was not taken lightly as family stability was crucial. Children were cherished not only for labor but for continuity. They represented the future, ensuring that family names, skills, and traditions endured. The loss of a child was deeply mourned, reflected in amulets and prayers seeking divine protection. Death, though feared, was not viewed as an end. Even common Egyptians believed in an afterlife where the soul would continue its journey. While they could not afford elaborate tombs, they hoped for recognition by the gods through moral living. Judgment after death depended not on status, but on the heart's purity. This belief offered comfort and purpose, encouraging ethical behavior in life. Storytelling was another vital aspect of cultural life. Myths, moral tales, and humorous stories were shared orally, especially in the evenings. These narratives conveyed values, explained the world, and entertained. Wisdom was passed not through books but through voices. Despite hardship, ordinary Egyptians did not see themselves as oppressed or insignificant. They understood their place in the cosmic order. Their work sustained the gods, the king, and the land itself. This sense of contribution gave dignity to their lives even in poverty. In the end, the greatness of ancient Egypt was not built solely by pharaohs or priests, but by millions of unnamed individuals who lived, worked, believed, and hoped along the Nile. Their homes have crumbled, their tools rusted, and their names faded, but their way of life shaped one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. Through faith, community, and resilience, ordinary Egyptians found meaning in the everyday, and in doing so they ensured that Egypt would endure for thousands of years.